Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Sports Hour. Today we have a very special interview with Mr. Len Kasper. How y'all doing, Len?
I'm doing great, James. How are you?
Very well. Let's get the handshake down. There we go. So, Len, just first off, before we get off with any questions, where are you from? You're a Glencoe resident, but where were you born initially?
So I was born in a real small town in Michigan. The name of the town is Shepherd. Population about 1,500. So maybe roughly the graduating class of New Trier. My high school class when I graduated was 116, and so a very rural area. Grew up a big sports fan, but followed a lot of the Detroit teams. And I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, and that was kind of my first, quote, big city experience.
I have a lot of family members in Canada, and they're around Canada and in Michigan. They're big Tigers fans, so they're a little annoyed.
I can see how that would be the case.
So, but what made you move to Glencoe, just to see the city, the town, be close to the city?
Yeah, when I got the Cubs job prior to the 2005 season, we had to figure out where to live, and at the time we were in Florida. I had done the Marlins games on television, and I'll never forget, we came up here in December to look for houses, and the North Shore was very appealing to us. My wife's from Milwaukee, and she grew up on the North Shore of Milwaukee, which is smaller but similar to Chicago. And we looked at Wilmette and Winnetka and Highland Park and Glencoe and Northbrook and Deerfield and River Woods and Glenview, and I think we looked at 22 houses over the course of 2 days. But we kind of settled on a couple of options, and one was the house we ended up buying here in Glencoe, and another one was in Highland Park. But we loved the school district, New Trier. We just loved kind of the vibe of the area, and fairly close to the city, and also not too far from Milwaukee. So it just kind of made sense for us to live up here.
All right, definitely for easy travel between Wrigley, Comiskey, Milwaukee, and many other stadiums that are an hour-long plane ride. Now, of course, what was it like broadcasting the Cubs throughout the 162-game season? On average, how many games did you broadcast along the season?
It's interesting. When I was not on television, I was doing a little radio, so I ended up broadcasting every regular season game this year. I did about 30 spring training games, so that's 30 plus 162, that's 192, and I think the Cubs played 15 or 16 playoff games, so I did over 200 games. It was the best season I've ever had as a broadcaster. It's the best team I've ever covered, and you kind of knew at an early point, 25-6 through the first 31 games, that the Cubs were the best team, and they went out and they proved it. They bludgeoned people early. They had some signature comeback wins late, and then I thought the postseason in particular was really fun. In all three series, there were moments where you thought they might not win, they found ways. In San Francisco, the big ninth inning in Game 4 to avoid Game 5. In LA, after being shut out twice in a row, the bats came alive, and then they come back in the World Series down 3-1. So it was thrilling, it was fun, and it was the best team, and they really deserved to win.
Definitely during my show that I discussed last night, I definitely said that timely hitting was going to come into it, but it wasn't as much timely hitting in the later innings, but it seemed like it wasn't aggressive hitting, because they got shut out in the Dodgers series, and that made me think, okay, they're seeing first pitch strike, which is right over the heart of the plate, go ahead and swing. And that didn't seem to occur to me at all until Baez did it on the first pitch in that, I think it was 6th inning.
Sure, yeah, and
he teed off into the right center field,
I think
amazing.
What made this offense so good is their ability to not get themselves out. Very patient, took pitches, and I do think there were times when pitchers against a team like the Cubs are going to try to get ahead early, and not necessarily groove a fastball, but definitely throw strikes early. So I do think that first pitch on occasion is the best pitch to hit. And the Baez, as you said, the Baez home run was huge. Rizzo had a couple of big home runs. Addison Russell. There were just these moments where you weren't quite sure their Cubs were going to pull it off, and they found a way to have one of those big innings.
Right.
It was such a joy to watch, and the memories. There's so many of them that not that I forget about them, but every once in a while I go, oh yeah, that I remember that. Now I remember that game or that pitch or that particular moment. There were so many of them, and again, I've never had a season quite like it.
Yeah, because everyone's gonna go around. Remember, like saying, "Here I was in front of my TV watching the Cubs win," but they're gonna also say, "Where were you when the Cubs ended 108 years of frustration?"
That's right.
So, obviously, with partners and like your broadcasting, Ron Coomer, what's he as like a guy that you know? What kind of a friend is he?
Ron Coomer's, I call him the best teammate I've ever had. We've become really good friends over the course of, he's been here I think only 3 seasons, but just a quick example, we generally on the team flights, we sit next to the same people. We don't have assigned seating, but we generally sit in the same row with the same guy. And when the Cubs went from WGN over to CBS Radio, there were some changes in the radio staff. So we unfortunately lost a couple of guys who we were very tight with. I sat next to one of them on the plane, and Ron sat next to the other guy. And when we found out what the new radio deal was going to be, he called me and he said, "You're my new row mate on the flight." And I said, "Yeah, okay, great." So now we sit together on the plane, and we get along very, very well. I think he's a really great baseball mind. He's a terrific broadcaster, and I've really enjoyed working with him. In the limited time I've done some radio, obviously I do mostly television with Jim DeShays, but working with Pat Hughes and Ron Coomer's been a lot of fun.
Now, what advice would you give to up and coming broadcasters like myself, or say any other broadcasters?
Well, I think there are a few things. The first thing to be said is there's no one specific path to get where you want to go. If I laid out in excruciating detail how I got here, I don't think I would say that's how you need to get here. I think if you talk to other broadcasters, they would tell you a very different story of how they got. Now, having said that, there are some common threads, and one of those things is doing as much as you possibly can in terms of broadcasting games, doing talk shows, doing interviews like we're doing right now. All those things you do will make you better. Experience, like a lot of other fields, is paramount in broadcasting. So that's number one. Number two is preparation for whatever game or whatever event you're covering, to be as prepared as you possibly can. It requires a lot of work beforehand, in most cases, to do that. I still have friends to this day who know I'm a broadcaster but don't know much about it. They assume that I just show up 5 minutes before the first pitch and call the game. Anyone who's done any broadcasting can tell you that's not the case, and you show up 3 or 4 hours before the event, and there's a lot of preparation and pregame work involved with that. So I think practice, experience, preparation, and then also putting yourself in good positions to be noticed and to succeed. Getting to know people in the business. All those things are really important, but the bedrock of our business, again, is to do it as much as you possibly can.
Right, yeah, that's totally the practice, doing it as many times as you can. I'm actually broadcasting a couple of basketball games coming up in the upcoming months, as basketball just started. Football obviously has ended, but I did get a chance to broadcast the Evanston game, and a friend of mine broadcasted the GBS game, which we're very, of course, happy to broadcast, but it's just the experience,
no
practice until you can never get it correct. with broadcasting because the game will change in an instant.
Yeah.
And like, you can't have just a common cliche game that is basically OCD, but from like it'll be one game to the next, and it'll be different from then.
Yep. And the ability to adapt and to adjust is really, really important.
All right, but obviously the Cubs ending 108-year frustration. What does our roster look like? I mean, we're not losing that many players. We lost Fowler because he declined the option. Chapman, still free agent, and then we lose, I don't know how many players, but what do you think would be our starting 5 pitchers?
Well, obviously things can change before this interview airs, but my guess is you pretty much pegged it. Chapman probably won't be back.
Yeah.
Fowler probably won't be back. Jason Hamill will not return. It's possible Travis Wood could end up signing elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the nucleus will remain intact. If I had to predict a starting 5 rotation at this point, I would say John Lester will be number 1. Jake Arrieta would be number 2. Kyle Hendricks would be number 3. John Lackey, probably your number 4, and Mike Montgomery, the left-hander, probably your number 5. I do think the Cubs will look at some other starting options because you don't want to go into any season with only 5 guys. You want to have 6 or 7 if you possibly can, maybe even 8 or 9, just to make sure you have options.
Yeah.
But I think Montgomery will probably replace Hamill in the rotation.
Yeah, I heard that today actually from MLB Network as I was watching. They said they're possibly thinking of adding a 26th player to that roster instead of making it the September call-ups.
Right.
So that way the bullpens aren't like 10 or 13 like the Cubs have, making it just 8 or 9. What's your take on that?
I like it. I think in tandem with the 26th spot, I think they're going to limit those September rosters to maybe 28. Which I really like. September baseball can be onerous at times. Way too many players. It kind of can take on a spring training feel. And so I think the give and take is we'll add a 26th man on opening day, but make sure we limit the amount of movement that happens in September. At this point, most teams go with 13 pitchers as it is. Mm-hmm. Five starters, 8 relievers. I think in a lot of cases that 26th man will be a position player.
Yeah.
Whether it is a third catcher, which the Cubs used a lot last year and may continue to do again this year, or a designated pinch runner / defensive guy, or maybe just one guy can give you a really good at bat off the bench. I think for Joe Madden, he looks at it more of. It gives me even more flexibility in terms of defensive lineups, offensive lineups, and I think that 26th man, if it does happen, will in large part be position players.
Yeah, like you definitely touched on that. Like the Cubs, Joe Madden has done it. Dave Roberts has done it. Joe Madden used one pitcher with Mike Montgomery to handle a lefty. Then he brought in Travis Wood to handle with another lefty that's like a key hitter. And then he finishes with Chapman or their closer, Pedro Strop or Hector Rondon. Like, their bullpen, from what I've seen, 10, 11 people. But with other clubs, they have like 8 or 9, and then they have one setup guy before their closer. With the Indians, of course, they have their starters, then they go to Miller or whatever Crazy Hair is.
Crazy Hair?
I forget it.
Yeah.
But like him, and then they go to their closer. But with the Yankees, before Chapman was gone, they had Betanzas, they had Miller, and then they had Chapman.
Right.
7, 8, 9. They lost Chapman to get draft picks as well as cash for their prospects, and then they lost Miller for the same reason. Do you think that's kind of smart for the Yankees to do, or do you think they need like 2 setup men just to get to their closer?
Well, I think the Yankees are kind of doing what the Cubs did a few years ago. I think they wanted to get younger. They realized they had assets. They didn't think that they were a great contender to make the playoffs, and even if they did, they're probably a wild card team, and the chances of them winning the whole thing were probably pretty low.
Yeah.
now, the Yankees, I think that they stockpiled some prospects, traded Brian McCann out of Houston. So you're seeing the Yankees kind of do in some ways what the Cubs did a few seasons ago, but they're always going to have a lot of money to spend. So I think the Yankees can not only get younger, but also pick and choose and maybe take some veteran guys at a high salary, but for a year or two, as opposed to get locked into a 7 or 8 year contract. So I think the Yankees have a chance to be pretty good in 2017, but I think Brian Cashman looked at what the Cubs did, and I think he wants to get younger and wants to be good for a long time to come with young, controllable players.
Yeah, because you definitely mentioned that, and now put in a little something that's the new baby bombers, along with Gary Sanchez. Like 19 homers in his first 10 games or so.
It was like 40 games, I think. Yeah.
And it's like unprecedented, if that's the word to describe it. Like that's just nuts. He, to me, seemed like the rookie of the week for that. I mean, he just seemed like if they were to sway the MVP candidates, possibly. But obviously we had Manager of the Year come out with Francona and Roberts. Are you a little surprised by Roberts winning that, or do you think he totally deserves it?
No, I think he deserved it. The Dodgers suffered as many injuries as any team could possibly sustain, and they almost, pardon me, they almost got to the World Series in his first year as a manager. And I think there are a lot of, I see a lot of Joe in Dave Roberts, not afraid to make risky decisions. A lot of managers make by the book moves because they don't want to get criticized or second guessed. And I don't see Dave Roberts as a guy who's afraid to be second guessed. Really liked how he handled his bullpen. Their pitching was in really bad shape going into that series, and I thought he managed it very, very well. So, Joe would have been a great choice to win Manager of the Year for the second straight year, but I think it was Dave Roberts' award to win at pretty much every turn, and I think he's well deserved.
And Francona, definitely outright favorite. Probably nothing we can say about him that would make it feel like there was a different candidate. But you just think he definitely deserves it by far.
I think we saw throughout the postseason the best managers in baseball: Joe Madden, Bruce Bochy, Dave Roberts, Terry Francona. They might be the cream of the crop. I thought Dusty Baker had a really good year with the Nationals, a team that had definitely underachieved the season before. But there's some really good managers out there, and I think the Cubs saw just about all of them.
All right, and what about other managers that that maybe weren't on that list? Like you said, Dusty Baker. You said Bruce Bochy. Are there any others that might have been overlooked?
Sure. As I go down kind of the list, I think John Gibbons does a nice job in Toronto. Jeff Bannister in Texas, playoff team in his first two seasons as the Ranger manager. I think he has a long future ahead of him. I think Paul Molitor is growing into the job, even though the Twins were kind of in a rebuilding mode. I like Craig Counsell. He just recently signed a contract extension with the Brewers, and I think he has a chance to be a good one for a long time to come. And I'm also happy to see Bud Black is back. He's now managing the Colorado Rockies. I always liked the job he did in San Diego, and he'll now get another chance with a team that, for whatever reason, just can't seem to get over the hump. And I think he'll do a nice job in Colorado.
Obviously, we're just about to wrap this up. We have two more, and obviously with the Sunday, April 2nd game between the Cardinals and the Cubs in St. Louis. Do you think they should change it and make it at Wrigley just to celebrate getting the trophy, the rings? I bet we're probably going to have a good traveling crowd headed to Busch Stadium that day.
Well, the Cubs will open on April 10th on a Monday, and because of the weather, which is always a little iffy in April, I guess I'm cool with the Cubs home opener coming a little later. But it'll be a fun Sunday night in St. Louis. John Lester will be on the mound, and Maybe guessing Carlos Martinez for the Cardinals, or maybe Adam Wainwright. That'll be a lot of fun to watch, and I think it's a great way to open the season as the defending world champions. It's going to be fun to say that a lot.
I definitely say, but it would be nice to have the Cubs, the World Series champions, have opened the season. And then what they should do is they should try to make it like an interleague play where they did with the Royals and the Mets this year.
Right.
Against the Indians in like a 3-game series.
That would have been
who's
interesting.
Retained their World Series roster. But projections next year, by chance, like who's looking to be the best team? Who's looking to be on the outside looking in, or who's looking to be the team that could surprise us all?
I don't think there's any pundit out there who will not pick the Cubs to be the best team in baseball again. They might not pick them to win the World Series just because there are some other good teams, and anything can happen, but the Cubs will be the prohibitive favorite in the Central Division, probably the prohibitive favorite to be the best team in the National League, and I, like I said, I'd be really surprised if anybody who follows the game closely says otherwise. Doesn't mean that it's guaranteed the Cubs are going to roll through everybody and win again. It's very tough to do.
Right.
But I think Cub fans everywhere can feel very good that their team is going to be one of the game's elite for many years to come.
Yeah, but I wouldn't from the Cubs, they definitely didn't roll through teams. They battled through the hardship of losing in Game 3 against the Giants, and then winning in Game 4 from a come from behind, beating the Dodgers. I wouldn't say they rolled through them, but they beat them in 6. That was a very tight series. And then obviously coming from 3-1 down against the Indians. The Indians definitely seemed like they were the clear favorite throughout the postseason. I mean, and the regular season, winning the Central, winning the ALDS by sweeping, winning in 5 against
Blue Jays,
and then almost beating the Cubs in 5 against.
Yeah, no, look, the Indians had a great run, and they've got Andrew Miller. I like their starting rotation. We didn't see Carlos Carrasco.
We didn't see Salazar.
Salazar, we only saw in relief. So their starting rotation is really strong, and they didn't have Michael Brantley, who is arguably their best position player.
With
so
injuries.
The Indians. You make a really good case for the Indians being the pick in the American League. How fun would that be to see the Cubs and Indians again next year in the playoffs? Could happen. You never know.
Indians would definitely have a good ball club.
Yep.
And the Cubs, I think with Chapman, that kind of put the icing on the cake to give them the championship they needed. But one thing that kind of confused me was the amount of times that Chapman was used. 22, I think it was 22 innings pitched over the course of, 9 innings over the course of 3 games. That's sometimes too many for a closer.
It worked. You saw Kenley Jansen do it. You saw Miller do it. I think Joe decided, look, he's my best guy. We got him for this exact reason. I'm gonna ride that arm as hard as we can. And while he wasn't quite as sharp in Game 7, people tend to forget he came back out in the 9th and pitched a scoreless 9th and actually got the win in Game 7, which is weird to think considering he gave it up in the 8th. But he battled. He did a lot of things he wasn't used to doing. He was used to a clean 1-2-3 inning that came in a lot of times with men on base in the 8th, in the 7th, and he's a world champion. So all's well that ends well.
That is definitely true. Well, the Cubs have definitely ended the 108 years of frustration, but I can't say this enough. It still feels like a dream, honestly. I bet I'm not just saying that as myself, I'm probably saying it for all Cub fans, but Len, I couldn't agree with you more that the projections you've stated, the rosters that are in for all teams, including the Cubs, as well as what the managers of the year, managers that were overlooked. Everything in that, I couldn't just say this, but I'm happy with the interview. That was a great interview, so I definitely appreciate
Thanks,
it.
James.
But
Enjoyed it.
we gotta end this with you saying you're listening to our radio station. This is Radiothon here on WNTH 80.1 FM. So I'm gonna hand it to Len,
Okay.
who's going to say these key words.
Hey everybody, it's Len Kasper, the television play-by-play voice of the Chicago Cubs. You're listening to 88.1, the voice of New Trier.
All right, thanks, Len. I
Does that work?
definitely
You got
appreciate
it,
the
James.
interview.